All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 7. I'd like to thank the sponsors for session 7 this morning, Hudson Group, Siemens, and JBT Aerotech. Thank you for your support. I'd like to start with a bit of housekeeping here. Disclaimer that the individual opinions and statements expressed on this panel are solely those of the informed professionals and do not necessarily represent those of their employers or any affiliated organization. Did the lawyers get that right for us there? Thank you. So just a quick overview of the pilot community by the numbers. In 2015, the FAA had over 590,000 licensed pilots in the United States. AOPA touts a membership of over 385,000 members, and ALPA has 57,000 members and counting. So clearly the pilot community is a significant population within our aviation customers or guest base. And when we were conceiving this panel, we thought it would be great to hear from some of the folks that use our airports frequently, both here in the United States and all over the world, and get their perspective on some significant issues in the industry today. So we'll dive in with a popular one that we've been talking about throughout the conference, which is ATC modernization. And this is a multi-part question, so let's start with, in your perspective, is the system we have today broken? Is modernization through privatization the answer? And where do you see the opportunities for improvement? So take that in any piece you want, and let's start with our former FAA employee, Mr. Pete Elmore with NetJets.
Thanks, Kevin. Is the system broken? In the 1950s, 1960s, the FAA needed technology, and they needed it bad. And it didn't exist. So in the 1950s, 1960s, even through the 1970s, the FAA drove technology. They made things happen in computers that didn't happen anywhere else. In the ARCH 3A system that up until just a few years ago ran places like New York, LA, little places like that, ARCH 3A was run on a Sperry Univac computer that in the late 80s was upgraded to get an entire megabyte of solid state memory at the cost of $1 million per site. Now, ARCH 3A ran on the Sperry Univac computer that was card loaded. Now, those of you who have studied, I used to say computer science, now I say computer history. A card looks like this, and it's got holes punched into it for where the ones and the zeros are. And you have all of these cards in a box, and you have to stack them up, and then they have to pass through to load the software. There was no operating system on that computer. It didn't have enough processing horsepower to deal with the overhead. Okay, now let's fast forward. 1980 comes along. IBM and Intel launched the PC. Apple is nothing at the moment, and technology goes just absolutely bananas. The FAA didn't keep up. We did a project out at Edwards in which we put in Sun Microsystem computers, off-the-shelf computers. It was the first air traffic off-the-shelf system. And they came to us from Washington. They said, hey, where are your blueprints for your keyboards? And where's the maintenance manual on how to replace all of the components of the keyboard? And we went, here's the maintenance manual. You unplug it, you throw it in the trash, you take the next $12 keyboard and you stick it in there. You don't repair anything. You don't repair anything? No, man, you're paying a guy 25 bucks an hour to repair a $12 keyboard? Are you kidding me? So I don't know that the system itself is broken in as much as it needs a complete paradigm shift away from the we're driving technology and more acceptance of what's out there. The FMS systems today are in the same problems that the FAA computers are in that all this new airspace that's going in and all these new approaches, the airlines are having to decide which waypoints to drop out because they're out of memory in the FMS. And it's not like going to the Apple Wizard Bar and say, hey, can you up my memory and my FMS on my DC-10? Because just opening the box is about $250,000 worth of certification issues. So broken? No, but about as flexible as a steel beam.
Thank you. Let's move down the line. Bill, your thoughts.
So I don't know if privatization is the answer, but I do look at what the FAA did with the flight service station network, and that was essentially privatized. And I think that was an example where you saw costs decrease considerably and service went up dramatically because they started using technology. Electronic weather data became more available. Information was easily consumed by consumer applications that were developed, things that came along later like ForeFlight, Jet Flight Deck, all kinds of applications that could just connect to the internet and get all the information. And I don't know a pilot that calls a flight service station for a briefing anymore. That's kind of a lost thing, but you know, when I learned to fly, that was there, and the FAA was not doing a very good job of progressing past, they couldn't get past themselves. So in that case, that was a real good example of where a privatization effort worked and was successful. I think the two big questions for me in terms of privatization is the governance of the ATC organization. That's a very hotly contested topic. One of the big fears is that certain groups in the industry would exercise much more control over it than other groups. So if you think of it as kind of like if you gave control of the oceans to shipping companies or passenger cruise companies or something like that, or gave controls of highways to different companies. So the governance is a big issue. I don't know what the answer to that is. It'd be nice to think that we could get the benefits of privatization and figure out how to address everybody's concerns with a governance structure that was fair. And then the next piece, and this is the one where I actually do have an opinion on it, is how is it funded? Because many of the privatization models include a user fee system. And there are merits to that system, but I can tell you from operating aircraft all over the world, Canada has a user fee system, Europe has a user fee system. There's two problems with user fee systems. One is that you have to create some sort of administration to track all the airplanes where they're going and figure out who to bill. So you effectively, for every dollar you bill for, a percentage of the money is lost in just figuring out who it was and getting what's left of that dollar after you pay for your administrative costs to its intended purpose. And from a customer experience, it's miserable. We get bills all the time from Europe and Africa and Canada for our airplanes, and we always have to try to match it up on our end. And the government agencies in all these countries aren't always the most accurate in the information they produce. So we end up not only with the time on their end, which is costing them out of the revenue they're trying to collect, but it's also costing the users time and money in their accounting departments to track it down. So I do think that what the U.S. has always used to fund ATC is taxes based on fuel consumption and other things that are there. And I do think a tax mechanism is still the right funding mechanism. Adjust the rates or whatever as you see appropriate to get the necessary revenues, but don't go with a user fee-based system.
Thank you, Bill. Jesse, flying with a scheduled airline, where do you see the impacts of this?
All right. That's on the microphone.
Well, I can tell you that from the airline perspective, just this week I was in O'Hare and we were sent out to a different runway. We got to the end of the runway and the controller had no idea who we were because she couldn't find the strip of paper. And so I think there's some modernization there that could happen, that could facilitate and help those kind of things, prevent them from happening. Certainly it's a pretty minor situation, so we're moving all of 0 miles an hour at that point. But you know, when you're airborne, you want things to happen quickly. As far as funding it, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. I think that it needs to become a system that works better than it does today. And the reason that it does work the way it does today is because of the people that we have and the people with all the experience that are passing that down. The system, I think, could be better.
Thank you. Todd?
Thanks. So as a GA pilot perspective, I don't think it's broken. I think it needs potentially some severe tweaking. But the FAA has made some strides with next-gen Metroplex, introduction of ADS-B, and really the GPS navigation that really has changed flying for the GA pilot. And the situational awareness and the traffic around you and all those fun things that make it safer to fly, assuming you're upgrading those systems in your airplane and things like that. I think there's opportunities without going to a corporate private structure for ATC. You have good examples. Bill mentioned a couple with, thank you, with the flight standards or flight service stations, but also the contract tower program. You know, we've got 253 towers that are run by, a lot of them are ex-FAA officials, but they're a private company running those towers, saving the FAA money and also doing a really good job of meeting the safety standards. And so we could potentially use some of those models and help maybe the FAA, who's really a regulator and safety is their primary function, but find a way to help them innovate and better leverage public-private partnerships like that without going to a full private or government corporation for ATC.
Absolutely, and the other significant system that comes to mind is the ADS-B system, where the FAA is really now a customer of industry buying the data to provide that aspect of air traffic control services. So it's incremental. We've seen several of these functions of the FAA outsourced essentially, and the change in governance that's being contemplated will be significant. So let's move on. We had a great discussion a few minutes ago about drones and all the potential implications of those going forward with the industry. So on a scale of 1 to 10, of all the things you guys think about as you're preparing to take a flight and you know, the weather, where you're going, you know, all the implications that you have to deal with along the way with flight planning and, you know, is the coffee going to be hot? Who knows? I mean, you guys worry about a lot of things in a day. But how big of a concern are drones in that thought process, with 1 being I'm more worried about the coffee, and 10 being it's like one of the top 3 things I'm thinking about? Where does it sit in that spectrum of your concerns? Let's start with Pete.
Well, let me change hats for just a second. In addition to my work with NetJets as a captain, I also am now flying in the Orange County Sheriff's Department Reserve. And one of the things that we do is search and rescue. We also do communications. If there's an event of some kind that happens down in Laguna Canyon where they don't have comm coverage, we will go up and we'll carry a repeater with us, and we'll go orbit the area to provide comm for the people on the ground. In the jets, we don't worry about it that much because you're in and out. It's an airport, and most of the time you don't see too many drones near the airport. But when there's an event where there's a lost hiker, or somebody fell down a cliff, or a car went over the edge, everybody and their brother with a Phantom wants to get out there and take pictures because they're going to make $1 million by selling that to the local news station, right? Or at least that's what they think. And in the meantime, we're trying to provide critical communications to the guys on the ground. So in the jets, it's a 1. When we're doing low altitude, and the helicopter guys have it even worse than we do. So for those guys, you know, it's anywhere between a 5 to a 9, depending on the event and the time.
Thank you. Bill?
Yep. I would echo Pete's comments there. Flying, if I'm blasting off in one of our corporate jets and going to be in the high altitude structure for most of the flight, arriving and departing, you know, the time spent downward drones are concerns pretty low, and it's inside of an airport where I think the average drone user probably has, it's kind of self-evident there's an airport with a bunch of airplanes taking off and landing, so I think there's inherently a little more discretion used by those by the drone operators there. But one in that case, but a friend of mine owns and operates a tour service with helicopters in Hawaii out of Lahui, and I know that for them it's an 8 or a 9 because there's tourists everywhere. They brought their drone on vacation with them, and they're trying to fly around and show people waterfalls and everything else, and the drone's up there trying to look at the waterfall too. And they've had a few very close calls, no instances that caused any loss of life or property, but definitely some surprising aha moments in his operation.
He doesn't like that.
Yeah, I don't like the green one. I would say flying in the airline world, again, like as Bill said, that the people are well aware where Chicago O'Hare is, where the Houston airport is. We're starting with the mainline aircraft to start doing flying to some of the smaller airports, and drone operators may not be aware of how far out you're lining up a jet to land. That's if we were to be concerned, it would be flying into the smaller airports, and somebody's out there well above the 400-foot limit, because hopefully we're not below that till we're pretty close to the airport. But that's a place where we'd be looking out. Right now, we treat it as it's in the same section of our book as a laser event in terms of reporting. Certainly, I don't want to see a drone go through one of our engines or hit the airplane at all, but the aircraft are stressed for pretty large birds. I imagine a small drone wouldn't do too much yet.
And that's worth noting is windshield impact certification. Part 25 aircraft, anything in the air transport category, is certified. You've seen the videos, right, where they fire a chicken at the not a live one. Fire a chicken at the windshield, make sure it doesn't go through. Unfortunately, when you get into smaller aircraft, things that are not Part 25 certified, there is zero certification. And anybody that watches Mythbusters from the early season saw that debacle go through. Yeah, you can get a sparrow through the windshield of a single engine airplane without any problem.
So different perspective from small GA, so it's easy. So leaving Camarillo Airport, I can take off and go out to the coast and fly along at 1,000 feet. Drone operators are supposed to be operating at 400 or under, and technically I guess I can go down into that airspace when I'm out over the water away from the shore. So at that point I would be thinking about it, but just leaving and going from A to B from one airport to the other, it's not really something I think about that much. And I'm a 107 operator myself, and the airport operates a drone at the airport at Camarillo and Oxnard for facility inspection, wildlife monitoring, perimeter security. Our sheriff also operates some small quadcopters to supplement their air operations. But I agree, it's really not necessarily the commercial operators that you need to be thinking about. I think most of them get it. They've gone through the process to become legitimate. But it's the hobbyists, we do a lot of outreach in Ventura County to raise the awareness, but I don't think everybody's able to do that, especially the airports where it might just be the ag commissioner or an assistant city manager that's running it, to do that same kind of outreach and raise the awareness. So it's probably at those smaller airports that I would have a greater concern, but for the most part, more concerned about weather and things like that, for sure.
Okay, thanks. So let's move over to airport facilities. We had a great presentation this morning on the implications of critical aircraft on airports, which is an ever-evolving topic. As you guys visit airports around the world, what issues do you frequently encounter on the airfield or in the terminal environment that are significant and perhaps limiting to your ability to operate? Where do you see opportunities for airports to perhaps be more diligent in their planning or execution of improvements or changes to the facility that could assist you as operators?
I think that from our standpoint, in the corporate jets, you're seeing corporate jets now in the size and weight category of the small airlines. The Global 7000 max gross takeoff weight is well over 100,000 pounds. You're looking at 5 or 6 airplanes now that have 95+ foot wingspans. And quite often, this being the territory of the airlines, you may fly into an airport with only one runway or one complex that is capable of accepting that level of, or that size of aircraft. And it's going to be right next to the terminal, right? Because it's the airline guys and put them right next to the terminal, and it's fine. And the FBO is way over there, and so now you're set with a 20-minute taxi and 3 runway crossings in order to get from where you can land to where you've got to kick the people, deplane the passengers. But that kind of setup sometimes is an issue, and then runway length as well. You quite often find yourself with only one runway that's long enough. That's the airline runway, and it's not where you need it to be. So, or it's noise. We don't allow jets on this runway. Well, okay. The Citation 10 launches out of Santa Monica. Anybody here from Santa Monica? No, good. Launches out of the People's Republic of Santa Monica without any power reduction whatsoever. It is that quiet. I mean, it just whispers right on out, and it can depart, and you can be standing on the taxiway and continue your conversation. It's just an incredibly quiet aircraft. So you find yourself a lot of times limited to where you can operate on the airport, which runways, what part of the airport, what configuration, et cetera, that may not be what you need or may not be very convenient based on the limitations. So,
Thank you. Once again, from the corporate jet perspective, I think there's, I would echo what Pete said, but I think the single biggest limiting factor with corporate jets these days is because they're getting bigger. It's often weight. And it's usually for parking, not for landing and taxiing. It's, but where can I park this? If it's a hot summer day and it's on asphalt and you got a 95,000-pound airplane at a small airport, it can be a little nerve-wracking to wonder when you come back, is it going to have kind of settled into that AC if it wasn't built properly? But I do think it's important to also recognize that manufacturers are working hard to find ways to fit these airplanes in. So from the airport development side, I would say just think ahead in terms of weight anytime you have an opportunity to do infrastructure improvement, but also realize that the manufacturers are working on the other side. We operate a G650, and its max gross takeoff weight is up and right around the 100,000-pound mark. And there's some airports that have weight limits less than 100,000 pounds. So what the manufacturers do is they provide you with ASCs, which is a kind of like a service bulletin that you can install. It's simply a paperwork entry that reduces the max gross takeoff weight of that airplane to 75,000 pounds or 70 or whatever. And by reducing that weight on paper and also providing you with different power options for takeoff, they're able to make that aircraft fit into some of these airports under the weight limit and also allow it to comply with any noise restrictions that it might not otherwise be able to comply with. And John Wayne here is a good example. There's a specific procedure published in the G650 manual that allows you to operate that aircraft 24 hours a day at John Wayne, which has some pretty substantial noise curfews, but they're able to get all those noise sensor decibel ratings underneath it by reducing the weight and providing reduced power takeoff options. So
I think that we've had a decade or so of reduction. There's been a huge reduction in airline flying in size of aircraft. So along those same lines, you have cities that used to have mainline service, and now they have, or they've had regional service for the past 10 years or so. Mainline is starting to fly some of our smaller aircraft back to those places. I mean, I'm pretty sure we used to fly DC-10s into Monterey, according to some of the people that I've flown with. And if we've all been to Monterey, we can imagine that it's probably a little while to taxi that airplane around. But we're not going to do that. But there will be 737s and Airbuses and such showing up at these airports. and they have different requirements for clearance, and certainly there's those standards that we have, but maybe because we haven't been doing it, people haven't been paying close attention to it. I'm not sure. I mean, if the aircraft that you guys fly, being lower to the ground with the super long wingspans that are coming now, those obstacles become more of a factor. We've been parking this truck here for years, and then here comes this brand new corporate jet and its winglets on the ground. And we don't really want to see that. For example, a 737 that I fly has a scimitar winglet that goes up and down. And when they first came out with it, I suggested they paint the part that goes down orange because it'll be easier to find on the ground. Those are very easily taken off of the airplane by ground vehicles and such, and it's something to be conscientious about. If I was to fly that airplane, the short 737 is a Dash 700, and it's 118 feet long, so it's a little bit, trying to think, it's just slightly longer than a CRJ, the biggest one. And if I was to park it there and someone that wasn't aware was to pull up, maybe ARF or somebody that not familiar with the aircraft, they might take that winglet off, and that's a little bit exciting. So, yeah, I'd say that perhaps that awareness that kind of thing is coming would be appreciated on our end.
And today's 737 is not what it was 20 years ago.
No.
Right. So this is awesome. I'm taking all kinds of notes to make sure I can provide the best access possible for all you guys at our general aviation airports. But as a small GA pilot, again, at airports when I'm flying, for me it's really about the experience that I think I want to have. So I try and find that balance of cost and convenience, and then also the relationships that I might have. And so, for instance, one of my former employees is a general manager for Atlantic Aviation, and so I'm tied into that network pretty well. I'm a Signature loyalty customer, and so Signature is a brand I use quite often. And here at John Wayne, actually, I have a friend that works at Martin Aviation, so I was able to park with them during my visit here. But it also just depends on who I have with me also and the experience that they might want to have, whether San Diego is a good example, whether I would fly my small Piper Archer into Lindbergh and, you know, potentially congest that system up a little bit versus going to Montgomery or into Carlsbad or something like that. So really it's just that balance of what I think I want that experience to be for me and my either family or friends that I have with me, and then also just availability based on relationships that I've formed through the industry.
You bring up a great point there, the passenger component of that decision making of what airport are we going to use. And I know in some of our preparation for the panel, we had a discussion about the passenger either saying, I want to go to this airport because that's the one I want to use and I'm going here when I get there, versus the pilot's prerogative when the passenger says, I need to get to this address and there's multiple airports, and the decision-making process over which airport to use. Bill, would you want to expand on that a little bit in how that works with some of your customers and where you see the airport's attributes feeding into that decision-making cycle?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, our customers, about a third of the time they will specify the airport they want to use because they know where it's at, they know who they want to see, and they're familiar with it. But the other 2/3 of the time they haven't been to that area before or they don't know, so we actually just get an address as far as where they want to go. They say, I have a meeting at this address at 2 p.m. Tell me when I need to leave to make sure I'm there and have at least 15 minutes before my meeting starts. So in that case, the actual operator of the aircraft or the pilot has a lot of say over where that is going to go. And to echo his comments, it really is about the experience. Cost is a factor too, but the operator and the pilot end up usually deciding what airport to use based on the final destination. So I would say that making sure you have good facilities. I think corporate jets represent a lot of income potential to airports, and I think that segment of the business is growing. And so making sure you have good facilities that can provide the experience that people want, that everything from after they land, the taxi time, the length, everything till they can get their customer on their way and then back on the plane and off of your airport, does affect the amount of business you're going to have, because unlike an airline where it's just scheduled and set and that airplane's going to come to you every day, there's a lot of planes out there that are actually deciding whether or not they're going to use your airport or another airport down the road that can provide their client with a better experience.
Excellent, thanks.
And a good restaurant.
Go ahead, Todd.
So you should visit the Waypoint Cafe at Camarillo Airport.
That is one of the best out there. For
Shameless
sure.
plug.
It is.
One of my favorite places to go used to be the Typhoon over at Santa Monica.
Yeah.
You know, it's right there. It was right there on the runway, and it's not there. For the San Diego people, I go into Lindbergh because I got a thing for the fish market down on Harbor. You know,
So I was just going to add, we do our best to understand the facilities that our different FBOs have to offer. So when we get calls from pilots, we can direct them to the right location at our airports. Because we've got four full-service FBOs at Camarillo and 2 at Oxnard. And so there are choices not just between airports, but where you go on the airport as well. And so depending on what type of aircraft and things like that, we can direct them to the right point. But I think beyond that, when we get those calls as an airport, you know, we typically try and just do the handoff and put them in touch with the FBO. But I think there might be, after hearing some of these comments, more follow-up we can do and even find a way to greet you guys as pilots on behalf of the airport, not just leave that experience up to how the FBO might treat you to make sure that you feel welcome, even more so than just what the FBO is going to provide for you. So.
Excellent. So let's talk safety and security for a moment. You all fly a wide variety of airplanes. You go to a tremendous variety of airports, and depending on, you know, whether you're an airline operator, BizJet, fractional, GA, you're operating under different rules and regulations for the security and safety of the aircraft as well as the airports you're visiting. Big bucket we're diving into here. Where do you see one opportunity for improvement in the industry when you think of the regulatory structure you work under for safety and security? If you could change one thing, what would it be? What do you think would make this better?
You're about to make me pretty unpopular right now, aren't you? There are a number of airports around the country where somebody at the airport has decided that, doggone it, everybody going through the FBO is going to go through a metal detector. Okay, I'm the pilot. I don't need a knife to get into the cockpit. I get paid to be there. And quite often it becomes a huge flight delay just dealing with whoever it is that's in charge of security. As an example, I fly into an airport. I'm there to pick up my passengers. They're going to a little airport in Colorado because they're going elk hunting. What do you think they're bringing with them?
Jackets?
Yeah, paper airplanes with really, really sharp points on the end. And so here they come up to the X-ray machine and the metal detector. Excuse me, sir, you've got guns here. Yeah, no kidding. And so this whole dance has to occur where I have to interject myself and say, no, we are a 12-5 security program. I am accepting responsibility for this. Please leave me alone. And that goes back to the previous conversation where that just absolutely ruins the passenger experience. So what happens? It goes back to I tell our owner services people, and the next time Daddy Warbucks calls up and he says he wants to go elk hunting in Colorado, our owner services people say, okay, great. How about if we pick you up at this airport instead of that airport, because this airport's a lot easier to get you in and we can make sure you're there on time and you're not 3 hours late because we had to get some sort of gubernatorial decree that it's okay for you to get on the airplane. We operate as our own security under the FAA. We have ground security coordinators. We have airborne security. We have everything that's required. We have all of the TSA no-fly lists. We have, we have 3 security firms that we contract with for any number of issues, whether they be international or domestic. Two reside in-house with us in the building, and the others outside the building. So we don't have too much problem with that, as long as the airport does their part on securing people that just wander up. The People's Republic used to have a big problem with kids that would go in this gate and go out that gate and go across the end of the runway because it was quicker to go home after school from the high school. Yeah, that's exciting. So as long as, I mean, as long as we don't have a perimeter problem and people poking their nose around the airplane, we can do fine on our own.
I think for me, as far as safety and security, I don't know that I could pick one single element, but I think I could, since this is an opportunity to talk to a lot of people who probably have a great deal of influence over how security is viewed at an airport. I think the thing I would ask is that you take a philosophy of not just picking the easiest way to accomplish the security objective, because I think what I've seen at a lot of airports is if the TSA issues a security directive, the airport complies with it in the easiest method possible without thinking about how that might impact the customer experience at the end. And you know, I just remember when I was a kid, and I know we're not going to get back to this, but I remember going to the airport and like your grandparents and whatever, they could all walk down to the gate with you. You'd have lunch before you got on the plane. And really, whether it's in corporate aviation, we can still deliver that experience to customers more or less. But when you're working at your commercial airport or you're working with your FBOs or whatever, figure out how to comply with the TSA in the way that still preserves the customer experience. It's not easy. It actually takes work, but I know that we've found in San Luis Obispo, and I've seen it at other airports, that if you really sit down and work hard with the TSA and show them that you're accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish, there are ways to do that without impacting the customer experience. But it takes creativity, and it takes work, and hopefully, I know we're not going to go back to having less security, but I think as we move on, if we can progress to maintain or increase the levels of security, but do it in a way that is not intrusive to people. I think I've mentioned it a few times. My dream is it's like that hallway in Total Recall where there's just all the people walking back and forth behind the screen, and all the security screening happens. It's thorough. Everybody's getting screened 100%, but it's being done with absolutely zero impact on the customer. So I know we're not going to get there today, but I would just ask everybody adopt a philosophy of putting effort in instead of just going, well, if they need us to screen this, let's just do this, and that complies, and think about how the customer is going to be impacted.
I think that I would echo some of those same statements in the sense that the excitement that we all used to have to go travel. I travel down to Costa Rica and some other Central American countries on some of my trips, and you see there a complete division where you go through security and you cannot see who dropped you off. You can't communicate with anybody. There's the people that drop you off, they drop you off and you're gone. That's not a fun experience. I think that some of the airports in the U.S. have done a great job of making sure that the fun and entertainment of flying is still there on some level. And we can always look for improvements in that regard. From my perspective, where I interact with security is usually with the general public. Maybe they aren't behaving the way that they should, and expedited assistance is always good. If I'm sitting there in the airplane as the captain, if we're off the gate, I am the in-flight security coordinator. So I'm making those calls, decisions as to what to do. If we were at the gate, there's a difference when the door is open. We now have you have a ground security coordinator that comes to the aircraft. But if you're requesting assistance from the airport, helps to have them be there, and every minute counts in that kind of situation. And it could be. 2 weeks ago, I had a medical at the gate. We parked at Maui, and flight attendant freaks out, hands me a 2-year-old. I'm in the cockpit. So I've already put my stuff away. She runs up, hands me a 2-year-old, says, his mom's having a seizure, call somebody. Well, I've already put all my stuff away, and we use an iPad now. So I don't have any frequencies out or anything. I just switch to a radio, and it, happen to have ground up still, and I need paramedics at this gate. And they were fairly quick at getting somebody there, and you may know that a seizure is the kind of thing where you just kind of isolate the person, make sure they're not going to hurt themselves. But it very easily could have been a situation with a cardiac arrest and an AED and the whole situation. So expedited help, whether it's police or it's medical, is always appreciated on our end.
Yeah, from the small GA perspective, always having access to responders, I think, is important. Customer-friendly security, so if it's, I like the idea that all of our GA airports should be fenced. It doesn't allow that experience where you just walk up with your family and go wander around the airport, but I don't necessarily think that's appropriate anyways today, where you can still provide that through other avenues at your airport. I'm more concerned about either theft or vandalism of my airplane, sitting out on a ramp where it's a place that I'm not used to or I don't know very well. And so what I found, and I got Greg and Carlos over here from my staff, so we've had a few incidents of vandalism on our airport recently, and for those of you that don't have them, I highly recommend investing in video surveillance throughout the airport, not just in the terminal area. And I don't say that from a big brother perspective, but to be able to piece it together afterwards and help that tenant of yours or that customer that might be visiting your airport solve that issue and potentially identify who did that to that airplane is huge, because we've had gaps in our video coverage and it's much better now. And not only are we able to see things like that happening on the ramp, but we see tenants on the airport that you would think would be really good, well-behaved tenants, dumping things near the oil recycling area that aren't supposed to be there. And I really mean this. These are tenants that you would least suspect would be doing this, and we caught them doing it. So having a good video surveillance from that perspective to be able to help, not necessarily to be a big brother.
Okay, thank you. So in 5 words or less, we're going to the lightning round now. Most unusual thing you've seen on an airfield?
Guy was drunk New Year's Eve, went through the fence, ended up rolling the car onto the taxiway, got out and went walking down the runway looking for a bar.
5 words or less, Bill. Most unusual thing you've seen on an airfield?
Box, Switzerland, I guess, I don't know if I can do that in 5 words. Crossing guard came down and we stopped our Challenger to wait for bicycles to go through on the bike path. And then the gate went up and we continued.
Wow, that's awesome.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Bill. I can't remember where this was, but I was taxiing along and ground had a stop and a parade float just went by right in front of us. I guess they store it in a hangar or something there, but anyway, it kind of threw us both for a loop to see a parade float out there.
So mine was on TV. It was runway models on the runway. So mine wasn't unusual. It was the coolest. It was at Mojave Airport, and it was Spaceship Two, White Knight, and Proteus, all parked next to each other, with my airplane just on the side of it.
Awesome. Okay, and the last question, favorite airport?
Oh, now? San Luis Obispo is my favorite airport because the airport management cares about the pilots most of all.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to pick one people probably haven't heard of, Shelter Cove, California. Maybe somebody from Northern California, but it's a fantastic little spot up just south of Arcata. Little spit sticks out in the ocean. Runway drops off into the ocean at either end, and there's a pretty nice little restaurant there to get a bite to eat. Yeah, it's a restaurant.
I'd say, I don't know, it's always amazing to fly into Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Sometimes it's a little more exciting than what you're asking for, but when it's a nice day, it's pretty amazing to see Tetons going straight up right next to you.
No. And I might be a little biased myself, but I really like Camarillo.
Imagine
You've
that.
wait, hold on. You got corporate GA, small GA, helicopters, one of the largest wings of the Commemorative Air Force. We have a separate ultralight runway. We have a strong chapter of the EAA. Carl Honecker in the room? And again, one of the best restaurants out there. But Catalina is a great day trip too. I love Catalina Airport.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you. There will be a donation made to Wounded Warriors on your behalf. Thank you for taking the time to come talk to us today. If everyone could, when we're done, please remove your items from the room. They're going to set for lunch, and then when we come back, there will be another session before we sit and eat. So if you could please take your items with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. That was fun, guys. That really gives me some tips as an airport operator on
Well, you
some
have
things we can do a little bit
you have
better.
some fantastic airplanes. So
Thank you.
those are both a couple of really good ones. I think I liked Camarillo and the Waypoint's probably one of my favorites. How did everything go from your perspective with the AOPA thing this year?
Good. You know, that was a weekend of really turbulent winds.
Yeah, I know.
On both
It was-
directions, and so that